Hello, welcome to GM Vault. Have you ever had that moment where you have a couple of new players in your group, your game group, and they're just not engaged? They get to a situation like a battle or a difficult role-playing encounter, and they just shut down. Nothing comes out of them because they lack confidence, because they lack knowledge about how the game is played, because they lack an awareness of not only their skills but the other player's skills. All right, so this video is all about how you can get those people out of their shell and really exploring their character and their skills and make the game more fun. This is GM Vault. So how do you get your players to work together as a team? It's probably one of the biggest questions that I faced as a GM, because every single time we have a game, I find myself wondering why the players don't talk to one another and give each other suggestions about how to play. So in thinking about that, I kind of ruminated on what would help. What would help players to really engage with one another, as well as fully enjoy the versatility of the classes that they are playing in whatever RPG they happen to be in. So most of what I'm going to refer to today is going to be about Dungeons & Dragons, because that's what I'm playing on a regular basis, but it would apply to any of the games. I think one of the most important things that players can do, and this goes back to whenever I started playing D&D, whenever I was just a pre-teen, so going back to the early 1980s. We would get together as a group, we would sit down in a big group, and I was the youngest person in the room. I was about 12 years old, maybe 13 years old, and I was just getting started in even understanding advanced Dungeons & Dragons. The rules were a little too complicated for me, to be honest with you. I had enough trouble just kind of understanding how my class was played, and it really was my first experience with role-playing in a group, and I'm sitting there with these guys who were 17, 18, 19, some of them 20 years old, and they were kind enough to let me play the little kid who came in and was just learning the game, and they were tolerant of me, but the truth was I had no idea how to play. And sometimes they would get frustrated with me because I would take too long to decide what to do, or I just kind of sit back and be quiet and not say anything. But that's normal for a brand new role player, because not only do they not know the class, they don't know what anybody else's classes or abilities are, they don't know how to play their own character, they don't know the rules of the game, they don't know what's appropriate. Like, is it okay to say this, or do this, or cast this spell, or make this attack, or do this move, or ask a question of the GM? Maybe it's too forward, maybe that's not acceptable. There's a lot of social things that go on in a role-playing game that new players may not understand. So it's really important as a GM that you set the tone. And how do you do that? You let players talk with one another about what their class can do. So maybe in character, maybe not in character. I would say hint number one would be have your players discuss with one another about their class abilities. That's hint number one. Now, how would you go about doing that? Well, there's two ways. One, you could simply have like a session 0, but to be honest with you, session 0 is really not the best place for it. It really takes like a session 0.1 sometime later, after you've played a few sessions. Give them an opportunity to either sit in a bar in game and discuss with one another about how they could go about tackling, say, a mob of bandits, right? Then you could have one player say, for example, to another, or perhaps an NPC, and have them say to the player that's a little unsure of how to play their class, say, how would you handle it if you were attacked from behind? Very simple scenario. How would you handle it if you were attacked from behind? Surprise. What would be the first thing that you would do? Let them think this through. It might take a little while. In fact, you might find it a little bit boring, but the truth is the players will start to engage with how they would use their abilities. It's kind of cool if they can do that in character, right? So if they're playing a rough and tumble barbarian, I would swing my axe from behind, or I would, immediately charge them, and that way would throw them off balance. Let them talk about these sort of things in character. character, it can be kind of cool, right? So the wizard can say, well, of course, I would immediately cast multiple image, and that way they won't be able to hit me all at once. I'll give me a moment to think about my strategies. That's a really good place to start. And maybe you can even prep one of your players who's a little bit more experienced, who would be willing to talk about how they would play this in class, and then engage the players that are a little unsure of themselves by saying, it's okay right now to just say, well, what about this? And it's okay to ask me a question as the GM, and it's okay to ask the other players a question. So that's a really great place to start. The other thing you can do is make sure, this is hint number 2, make sure that you give enough time before a group of players does some sort of espionage, or they're going to infiltrate a well-armed location. Give them time to think through their strategy. Don't rush it along, and make sure to maybe even ask each and every player what their plan of attack would be. Let them discuss the strategy. It may create a little conflict in your group, but that's okay. As a GM, engaging your players in those social role-playing opportunities is really part of your responsibility. It's not written into the rules. It's an unwritten rule that you as the GM would give your players an opportunity to think through strategy. And each and every time you do that, they start to learn a little bit about what the other players in the group can do. The druid can turn into a mouse and sneak in and get information about what's going on inside the place you're about to infiltrate. That's a really good plan, right? The barbarian can maybe use his persuasion or intimidation skills. I will kill you, and if I don't, I'll find your mother and kill her too. Using intimidation can be a powerful role-playing tactic that can also give you your players an advantage in combat. But I find in combat, it's a lot of times whenever our newer players struggle to figure out what should I do and what's appropriate. Let them know everything is appropriate. Everything can cause a change in the battle. And by engaging with their class, looking at their player character sheets, looking at their abilities, becoming familiar with it is actually part of the game. So it's important because people have lives. They may not have had an opportunity to really study their player character sheet. And so you can give them an opportunity in game to look at that. And even in those conversations from hint number 1, give them a little hint. Say, why don't you look at your character sheet and see what spells you have available or what abilities you have available, and think about what skills you're good at, because that can help you in combat or in a role-playing situation where it's really important that you are strategic about how you relate to the guard, because the guard's initially very upset that you're here and he's ready to get off for the next shift, and you want what? You want to get into the gate? How do you move a hostile NPC to a friendly or at least neutral NPC so that you can get what you want? All of this stuff, I'm going to go backwards a little bit in my life whenever I was 12 and 13, 14 years old. Let me tell you, this stuff actually turned me into a pretty darn good actor. And I was a professional actor for 6 years. And I loved that part of my life. I fell in love with theater, but part of why I fell in love with theater was role-playing games. I loved sitting there with my friends in a safe space and being able to explore my character a little bit and take on the emotions that my character was going through as opposed to me as a person, I played this bald-headed monk-type character. I was kind of inspired by Friar Tuck, and I really loved playing that character because I could occasionally be a little bit drunk because he drank a little too much mead. And I started really working on my, jokes that I could tell and make the other players laugh. It was really part of the engagement. So hint number 1, you can give them an opportunity in sort of a safe space, a tavern space, or even outside of the game to talk about what would you do in a particular scenario if you were attacked from behind, or they're coming from above, or something like that, or you're trapped in a particular location, you can't get out, you're trapped in a cell. How would you imagine getting yourself out? That sort of thing. The next thing you can do is make sure your players have plenty of time before a infiltration or some sort of espionage where they have to sneak into a place. Why? That sort of strategic opportunity gives the players an opportunity to think through their abilities, their skills, their spells, whatever it may be, and how it might help them in a particular situation. And hopefully you don't have anybody in your group that's kind of a bully and a little pushy and say, no, that's not going to work. If you do, calm them down a little bit. Even a private DM message, can let them know, let's let everybody think through their strategies instead of just bullying through with your strategy, although you have a great one. Just DM that to somebody so you can calm them down. Give everybody an opportunity to think through that. That way, the next time there is a surprise attack, they maybe have something in their back pocket that they're ready to do. I have that deck of mini illusions that I'm going to toss one of the cards, and that will distract the guards or distract the people who are attacking us from behind, so I can get into a place where I can hide and shoot my short bow, right? So any of those opportunities help the players think ahead about their particular strategy. And then there's hint number 3, which is once they've got that worked out, throw them some curveballs. They're not just attacking from behind, they're attacking from the sides. You're not just stuck in a room, you're stuck in a room and you have 10 minutes until you die, a la Star Wars inside the crusher, the garbage and thing. So that sort of thing can really help players take what they've talked about and then push themselves to be even more strategic and give them confidence the next time around. All right, so those are my 3 tips. The first tip is make sure you have out-of-game or in-game safe opportunities for players to discuss a strategy given a particular scenario. You can introduce that scenario as an NPC, or you can just straight up as a GM say, okay, I want you guys to talk for about 5, 10, 15 minutes about what would you do if you're attacked from behind. I know it may seem a little cagey, but it can really help your new players get comfortable with their characters and their skills and their spells and abilities and their laser guns and whatever they happen to have. All right, and then the next thing that I would do if I were you is I would give them an opportunity before an infiltration or espionage type adventure where they can really think through how are they going to sneak in, how are they going to distract the guards. That also creates that interplay between players, allowing them to explore their characters and what they can do as opposed to what somebody else can do. Because a lot of times I find that players, they want to stay in character, so they don't want to know what another player's abilities are. They want it to kind of be an in-game surprise. Even though they themselves, maybe they played a druid for 6 years and are really comfortable with all the skills and abilities, they don't want to tell the new druid who's brand new to role-playing exactly how to play their character, because that's kind of, a little bit of a faux pas. You don't want to have that social blunder going on, party foul, where they tell somebody exactly how to play their character. That can be, really annoying. So they may be reluctant to do that, especially if they're a really, considerate player. But if in game you give them the opportunity to discuss those things, let them share. Well, I can call up some fey spirits of wolves, send them in first, let that distract them, and then the rogue can go in through the window, and before you know it, we've got them flanked, right? Let them think that through. Then the third thing to do is once they've talked that out, a few games later, give them the surprise encounter. Something that really forces them to think in novel ways. And hopefully they'll come up with a really cool idea like, my monk is going to flip on top of this rock, and then he's going to throw his knives at the door, hoping that it will crack it just slightly, and at that point he'll throw in that smoke bomb we got from the gnomes, right? Let them think through some really creative ideas and remind them all along, as the GM, it is totally okay to say these words. Anything goes in role-playing games. That's what makes them fun. Be creative. DM discretion allows you to be really creative with how you work through the game, and that can be some of the most memorable moments that you create whenever you're GMing. And always remember this important rule, and all this kind of relates to that. They're not playing D&D with you, the GM. You are all playing D&D or role-playing game together. If you're playing Deadlands, you're playing together. It's not the players playing with the GM, it's the GM playing with everybody else. It is everybody's game. So give the players permission to really think outside the box. And that's when you'll see your newer players, like I was when I was just a kid, really starting to explore their player characters and their abilities and skills and cool stuff like that. So All right, hope this was valuable. Talk to you later. I am Eric, and this is GM Vault.